My day job is I work at Mars Discovery District. I'm their lead clean tech advisor. And for those who don't know what Mars does, our mandate is really, we're not for profit, and our mandate is essentially to act as a catalyst within the high-tech sector. So health sciences, IT, and clean tech. Really working directly with entrepreneurs. I am an entrepreneur, so the idea is we're very pragmatic in our approach. We have a very large network that we can bring to bear. And so those with interesting IP come to Mars and essentially plug into a large network that is capable of catalyzing, we hope, their commercial success. So I'm on the innovation side of things, but obviously in clean energy, market push and market pull are intimately related. But I won't get into that today because we're going to hear from our panel first and then ideally have a really good discussion, which includes, of course, questions from the audience as to how we might want to see Feed-in Tariff 2.0, which is not a software release, by the way. 2.0 is a whole new, a much more complicated thing than a software release. So with no further ado, I'm really just going to let the panel sort of kick it into gear. And we're going to start off with John Doris, Relationship Manager with TD Commercial Banking. So we're going to start with the money, is that right?
Sure.
Okay.
Is this on? Everybody can hear me? My name is John Doris. I'm from the TD Commercial Bank in Ottawa. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I guess just a little bit of background. For the last year and a half, I've been able to arrange debt financing for a few FIT projects. One was a wind project, I think a 4-megawatt wind turbine project. Then there was a few 250 kilowatt rooftop solar projects. And I guess even though the first one we approved was in the spring of 2010, it's still not connected for a variety of reasons. So all my projects are still in the assembly process, so I don't have one yet connected to the grid. And just some background on TD's guidelines for financing renewable energy projects is that we're looking for companies or principals of the renewable energy project to have a core business outside of that renewable energy project that generates cash flow. They're looking to get into or get a FIT contract to, augment their existing revenue stream. And again, we would be the primary banker for that company. We would probably have a general security agreement over their assets, and we'd also take an assignment of the FIT contract as security as well. So we're not into what you would call pure play solar deals, where that renewable energy project is the only business. There's no secondary source of repayment. So maybe we'll get that on the table up front. So if you have any questions after that, please let me know. Thank you.
So I've learned as an entrepreneur, as I've gone through my up and down life, that it's not we entrepreneurs or CEOs or even influential people like Nick Parker that decide what technology gets installed. It's bankers. Is that true? You're really the gatekeeper of infrastructure, is that true?
Yeah, we're part of it.
So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because that is true, and perfectly well. So Nick Parker, why don't you go next?
Well, thanks, Tom, and it's good to be here and good to see this such a full room. I think we all really just want to wait and hear Chris Bentley speak in about an hour and a half, and then we can come back to our crystal ball, because it is very uncertain what FIT 2.0 will look like. Certainly, we have to deal with some of the connectivity issues, particularly up north. I've been working on a project with a couple of colleagues who are sitting here today on what it would look like up north in the Sioux area and beyond. And there's a real problem with people get access to the grid. So that sort of provokes me to think about, well, what happens if we don't have the kind of incentives and we don't have some of the kind of grid access, and what would the economics look like? And I think part of what we're going to be looking at is what the kind of vision that Jeremy Rifkin, whose new book is out, and I strongly commend it to you, it's really more about smart energy rather than clean energy and alternative energy, and tying this into microgrids and intelligent systems, even bringing areas like water and water distribution into this sort of stuff. So I think what I'm looking for in FIT 2.0, not so much as a project developer or as a direct investor, is what kind of sustainable utility system are we really trying to get at, and where do things like information technology play a bigger role, and community empowerment around that? So that for me is very, very important. Then I also think that there's real potential to do combined heat and power, and a FIT for that. And that seems really exciting. And people like Tom Heinzman at Bullfrog Power have been very, very articulate supporters and champions of that. And I think that is something that is economically really viable. So just a few opening salvos there so we can get into a conversation.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. Just as the banks are really the gatekeepers to the big money that allows us to build bigger solar farms rather than the odd panel, so too the operators of the grid are essentially the great gatekeepers as to how and why distributed power can be really enabled across the grid. And that's an interesting relationship that we've got to kind of unfold as time goes by if we're really going to build Grid 2.0 here in Ontario, which I know is part of the economic argument behind the Green Energy Act.
Right.
So we'll talk a bit about this too. So thanks for that, Nick. Next we have Steve Schmelzel. I hope I got that. Schmelzley, thank you. Senior underwriter with the RSA Group, who are Canada's leading insurer of renewable energy.
Thank you for having me, everyone. It's my first opportunity to speak at something of this nature, so I appreciate the invite, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions regarding insurance and the concerns surrounding it. I work for Royal & Sun Alliance. We are Canada's leading insurer of renewable energy. We do small hydro, wind, solar, and bio, as well as geothermal. Worldwide, we are the largest insurer of offshore wind, onshore wind, and just about there with solar and small hydro as well. I've been doing this for 3 years now. This is all I do. I do the construction of it, the operation of it, as well as the pre-stages during, we'll call it just premises liability and Met Tower operation before a solar farm or a wind farm is even in the installation phase. So my company sees it basically from the beginning and the end. The only thing I have to speak is my answers tonight will be on behalf of our Royal & Sun Alliance Insurance Group and not the insurance industry, as I only can speak for my company and not for the industry. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And I think last and certainly not least, Chris Stern of Pure Energies.
Hey, thanks very much, Tom. And thanks, Steve, for that safe harbor statement. Pure Energies, I'm not sure if you've heard from what we're up to. We're up to community power. We install, own, and operate solar power on residential rooftop throughout Ontario. So what we'd like to see from FIT 2.0 is a sustainable program that can last long enough to have legs so that it becomes an industry on its own without subsidies.
Okay, so I'm just going to start off with some hardballs. I'm going to put the tough questions out there as fast as I can. Clearly, I think, and this is my opinion, but please tell me if you disagree, something got screwed up really badly in FIT 1.0. Every single rural riding swung to the Conservatives, I think, for pretty clear reasons. Anecdotally, I think Ontario feels like they had industrial wind turbines owned by great big transnationals shoved down their throat, and they feel angry about it. Clearly, that messaging, I talked to somebody, for example, a reporter I've known for many years, a very smart woman who is into clean energy. She's got no problem with dealing with climate change. She's scientifically literate. But when I talked about the Green Energy Act, she got so mad, she started shaking and became incoherent because she really feels, that something was screwed up. So we have to admit that. How do we fix it? How do we go forward and fix the messaging and re-engage? And we're at a community power show, right? Presumably that's how we do it, is we engage locals in ownership and so on. But how do we approach the government in a positive way where we can remain allies, but we can admit the mistakes we've made and ask them to help us correct the mistake that they made? I'm going to blame it on the government, but it's not really the government's fault. How do we fix the problem, the PR problem? Nick, you want to take a stab at that?
Oh, thank you, Tom. I'm stalling guys for you. I think, first of all, the retail politics were pretty brutal and not entirely fair or accurate. So we have to acknowledge we live in a democracy and people are going to take pot shots left, right, or center. And, some of them were fair and some of them were totally unfair. And when a government tries to revise things and admits some mistakes, we're pretty unforgiving. And I think the incumbents have got a right to believe that many times the environmentalists didn't get out there and defend them, either on eco fees or this stuff. So that said, personally, I was a pretty big critic. I mean, I'm a supporter of this government, but I was a pretty big critic of this in the first place. And part of the reason is I think we have to, not make sure we're not a branch plant economy. We're not just importing somebody else's technology, We've got to do more innovation here. So companies like Morgan Solar that you, Tom, have been supportive of since the get-go, I think really, really important. Secondly, we've got to integrate this into the broader where do we want to go type thing. You know, we talk about smart meters and electric vehicles and revitalizing our auto sector, and we don't see all of this as part of a coherent whole of the kind of society we want. So I think we've got to do that. And then thirdly, in some of the work that I've been doing, I've been shocked actually about how little community ownership there is of some of these projects, particularly up north, where people are making money, but the community's not really benefiting. So I think we've got to find ways of harnessing capital and resources so that communities get a bigger piece of the payback in there, not just individuals.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
I stalled. Go ahead.
Nice stall. I think that it needs to be repositioned in the press. We're basically 1987 and Cantel's given cell phones to everybody. And they're very new and it's very expensive and it's very complicated. Except for the rest of the world, people have already been through this. They've been through Germany. They've had a lot of renewable energy since the last 10 or 11 years. So we just need to show people what actually can happen when creating real jobs. There's 400,000 jobs in Germany as a result of the renewable energy law there. So we need to explain it to them better in the press. As for the domestic content issue, and people like Morgan Solar, yes, it's interesting to have locally homegrown companies here. I'd like to caution that what ends up happening is people see that as a negative because, oh yes, we have to pay more for the power because we have to use panels that are made here. That is definitely an issue. I think that probably what should happen is tax credits should be given to domestic manufacturers rather than have higher fit rates, and let anybody that wants to ship in Ontario ship into Ontario. It's a global economy, and that's something that we need to get out there.
I think part of fixing the message that may have been delivered illy in the beginning is trying to find a solution for the smallest developer and the community group. I know at our insurance company, when this first started in FIT 1.0, we too probably looked at the bigger picture. We looked at we actually created a product specifically for renewable energy, and to dive it in further, specifically for wind, specifically for solar, and specifically for small hydro. But I think our oversight was we thought of single site solutions. And we didn't think of the small communities, the aggregators, the co-op funds. So once we saw how the renewable energy industry started to transform, we had to come up pretty quickly with a new solution for it. So one of the things we did was work directly with a few of the co-ops and a few of the aggregators and the community groups to try to find some insurance solutions, as off the top we realized we may have missed the mark. Because as much as we all love the large developers coming over with their very large sites, most of them already had global energy insurance programs in place. And here we had to do is find out how do we help out the farmers, the community groups, and the co-ops. Unfortunately, the current insurers of many of those groups, the mutuals, didn't want to take the risk off the top to put insurance in place for these types of groups. So what we did is found out a way to create a solution both from a coverage standpoint, but more difficultly from a cost standpoint, because until these things are installed and operating, there's very little cash flow coming in. So how do we get our exposure covered on install? So what we've tried to do is work on pay-per-install programs, small deposit or nil deposit premiums up front, very low price for premises liability. Again, I mentioned earlier on just plots of land that may in future be used for development. Solutions for meteorological towers that are in place to determine if in the future wind projects are viable. So what we tried to do right off the top is to meet the need of our local communities, which we are a part of. We already had the product in place for the large guys. That was the first things our head office teams, we were able to get from the UK. We're a global company, and we were able to get right off the bat the solution for the large guys. But the true challenge was finding, and we're still looking for them, and it will ever be changing, but finding a solution for the community groups, the co-ops, the aggregators, and the other small micro fit. And it is proud to say that our company can help from the single homeowner with the 5 kilowatt system on the rooftop or in their backyard through to your largest wind or your largest solar project.
Steve, I think you've hit a nail right on the head there in a couple of ways, actually. So I know is Deb Doncaster here? I mean, I know Deb Doncaster has been working very hard for a long time trying to figure out how to build a financial instrument for the general public to be able to participate in multiple wind projects across the province. So it provides capital to community projects, right, and B, it gets public ownership of some of those projects, which might mitigate some of this transnational throwing stuff on my head attitude that we've got, which is legitimate, right? I mean, and I think, too, and I'll leave this sort of maybe to the audience to take up a little bit at the end without starting too much of a firestorm. But I think part of the problem was the RESOP contracts on the wind side got folded into the feed-in tariff, and at that point, there was no community kicker. There was nobody out advocating for community power and local ownership, and so most of the grid got taken up with the big corporates who were first in line. And I think that's something that we need to go back and fix. And building instruments, whether they're insurance instruments or financial instruments that easily engage the local population. So it's got a liquidity aftermarket, so I can buy a bond for a couple $1,000 and I can sell it a few years later, so there's some liquidity, I think would go a long way. And I know Deb Doncaster is working on that as we speak, so maybe we'll have something. And did you want to jump in on the how we screwed that launch up, or?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
All right. So another point that got brought up, which I think is really important, part of the Green Energy Act is designed to build an industrial base that ultimately is creating jobs and selling technology to the rest of the world, not just to a protected local market. How on earth do we build a manufacturing sector in this province that can compete with the low-cost manufacturing in China, which is already dominating solar and wind? We'll never compete on price now. And also we have other countries like Korea who are placing enormous amounts of capital, very directed into innovation, makes my seed fund look like a seed. So those are two really dominant global competitors, and we're pretending as if we can just build this local domestic market, and lo and behold, our entrepreneurs will compete. Is that the case? And if so, why? And if not, how do we fix that? Chris, there you go. Yeah.
So just my background, I spent 7 years in solar manufacturing, which is a long time. Basically, it's not possible. So that's the unfortunate part of it. The fortunate part is that there's a lot of business models that are being created in Ontario because of it. So to think that we're going to be a global cell producer, a thin film producer in Ontario, it's just not going to happen. So that's why I'm saying for the plants that are already here now, they should be given tax breaks or some other way of operating and being a little bit more competitive. There's a lot of technologies out there and companies focused on this that are putting a lot of dollars to do R&D, and that's not what's coming here. What's coming here in terms of solar are module manufacturers that are basically robotized plants that have very little factory workers or skilled labor. So,
Nick,
we're getting along far too well up here, so I think it's time to just stir it up a bit. I disagree. I think we can make technology, and we can have thin film fabs here. The misunderstanding about China, and I spent a lot of time there, is about why they compete. They're not competing in these areas because of lower labor costs. There isn't much labor involved in a solar fab. It's capital, it's land, it's infrastructure, it's the government and the system getting behind areas that they want to win in and making these resources available at warp speed. We don't do that very well in North America, and we don't do it very well in Canada, in Ontario. It's just the nature of who we are. But in areas where we want to win, we need to do this. I mean, and we lose this over and over again. When Nortel went bankrupt, at that time it had more patents in the smart grid area than any other company in the world. But because of our free market orthodoxy and one thing or another, we let it go. And we've got to decide. It's more of a political decision, culturally, about how much we want to back sectors that we think are important, and then how do we get around that. So just to have a bit of fun there, and it's the same thing in some other areas. We do have players like Magna, who are moving into the solar area. We have IT players, even like RIM, that can play a role in the emerging smart grid integrated system. So we just got to decide how we want to play this, whether we want to naively, in my view, let the market drive everything, and I'm a venture capitalist, I get markets, or whether we want to pick areas that we think we can win in and go about it and put land, capital, people, universities, the whole 9 yards behind it. So how about that?
Can I retort?
Yeah, please.
I agree with you on the smart grid, absolutely, 100%. But not one tier one solar manufacturers here now. Not one tier one. So,
Well, that's...
and there's a reason for that. They're investing elsewhere, and it's not because they're getting better. It's not because there's a better fit there. It's because it's already existing. We're too late.
In China with Suntech Power, which, they started in, what is it? It went from zero to a multi-billion-dollar company in 5 years. And the technology wasn't even local. It just got brought back. There was land, capital, and all these other things that were made available like this.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago, and so that was 10. Yes, that was 10 years ago, and it's true. The Chinese government supported Trina, Yingli, and Suntech, $33 billion. It's absolutely true, but it was 10 years ago. So
I agree we've lost first mover advantage. I declare that round a draw. But I think what both of our panelists agreed on was that there is a lot of low-hanging fruit if we can leverage somehow our intellectual and innovative capacity in the smart grid. So why don't we push that a little bit, and what tweaks can we make the feed-in tariff to ensure that we have robust but competitive access to the grid such that innovations will, A, be pulled onto the grid, so there's some sort of demand for storage and for digital switches that can flow power two ways and all the rest of the stuff we know will make up the smart grid. How do we tweak the feed-in tariff to ensure that the different players within that space, the grid operators, the producers, and so on, will want to buy that stuff? And is it going to get legislated, or do we just create a separate feed-in tariff for that innovation? And two, what kind of market push signals do we want to put in there? So how do we, it's a complicated place, the grid, right? A lot of players, take storage as an example. Sandia Labs did a very famous report. 26 different players can benefit from the presence of ubiquitous storage on the grid. But it's very difficult to have more than one or two of those players pay for that same kilowatt hour of storage. So while storage, if present, would deliver huge economic benefit, it's difficult to divide those economic benefits up between the distributor, the industrial user, the wind producer, et cetera, et cetera. So how is it that we tweak access to the grid in an intelligent and robust way so it's done in a competitive manner, right? So the way in which it's done, we could then duplicate and do it in Texas, rather than just forcing the poor engineers to say, open your doors and let us hook it up, which I think is too blunt. And professionally, I think you get a lot of pushback, right? The engineers are not going to let the door be unlocked quite that easily. How is it that we tweak Feed-in Tariff 2.0 to unlock smart grid innovation? Anybody got any bright ideas about that?
it's a great idea.
Well,
Conceptually, we all agree, but it's.
Well, the thing is, Tom, you wouldn't be asked to moderate this session if you weren't qualified, but because you're the moderator, you don't get to express your own view. So on behalf of the rest of the panelists, I'm liberating you from that so that you can share your own view on this.
I'm going to wait and hear what you guys have to say first. Well, I take storage as an example, right? So California's got one way of doing it. They've decided to legislate a certain number of megawatt hours of grid storage for every megawatt hour of renewables. And it's, the ratio is, 1 to 10 or something like that. And they're just going to mandate it. And so what they're hoping is that the commercial scale storage companies are going to go down there, demonstrate their technology. They're going to get integrated to the grid because you have to. And ideally, you're going to generate economic benefit because you've got all your engineers and all your know-how down in California, and you get first mover advantage on storage. So my view is we should have a feed-in tariff for storage.
Okay, sorry, can I say something? Now, to Nick's point, Nick was talking about, creating an industry and being the first and blah, 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 blah. Here's where we can do it. Basically, electric vehicle is around the corner. There's pilot programs being started in lots of places, but nothing's really taken a hold yet. That's one place, absolutely, where we can marry solar power with energy storage, i.e. the car, and thirdly, the smart grid, which basically, let's say your car is parked, the sun's shining, the car's been charged, the grid needs power, it takes it from your car. So something like this, this type of marriage, and then the contractual arrangement that would work with whomever is delivering the power, that needs to be figured out. And that has not been figured out, absolutely not. So that's one place it can happen.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, unfortunately, for the audience's sake, with that. And I think
should we do a bear hug now?
Yeah, we can arm wrestle later, but no, I absolutely agree. there are very few places that are really genuinely innovating around this and who have some of the attributes that we have, i.e., we have knowledge of information technology, we have an auto sector, we have leadership in the FIT, and we have congestion on the grid, so we need to think about things differently anyway. The only thing there is, as you were saying, Tom, the system operators are, they're there to make sure the lights stay on. They're not there to innovate. So I think we need to sort of find some sort of islands at the localized level where you sort of build this out, pod by pod, and bring it to scale that way, rather than sort of imposing a macro view. But I definitely believe that this is an area, plug-in hybrids and all of that. The future's arriving very quickly, and from you can sort of see how from Ottawa to Windsor, we could win in this space. And in fact, we could collaborate beyond Ontario with our cousins and brothers and sisters in Quebec. And it would be a confederation project, and then you build it out into high-speed rail. I mean, the whole thing starts to fit together into a vision that is actually really compelling for us economically, socially, and of course environmentally.
Pod by pod, I think that's actually a brilliant suggestion. Give a firewall for the poor engineers, and then we entrepreneurs can play. I've been really foregoing some of our two financial guests, and I really want to kind of go back to that. Obviously, there was some instability in the market when Mr. Hudak decided to play wedge issue with the Green Energy Act. It's a democracy, but it did clearly generate some. Can you talk a little bit about how that instability affected the financing side and how you see it going forward? And we've got a minority government. There's some instability left, but clearly the Ontario public voted for the Green Energy Act, amongst other things. Can you talk a little bit about the instability as it occurred, what happened, and how you see it going forward and how we might mitigate that stuff?
I guess a couple of points. As I mentioned earlier, I have a few projects still in the assembly phase, and then there were some delays in connectivity, both on the developer's part and on the government's part, I guess the connection issues. So it goes back to the point where if you got a service, if you're getting a loan for a few $1,000,000 and you've got to service that interest cost, it talks about that secondary source of cash flow that's needed to help fund these projects in case there's any changes in your plan, any unforeseen contingencies. And personally, I'd like to see the OPA on a confidential basis share information with the banks, maybe TD Bank first before they share it with anybody else. But on the early success of the projects that are connected to the grid, share that information, demonstrate the cash flow or the revenue that's being generated on a per technology basis or per project based on the geographic area, the stability, the consistency of that cash flow, and then at least give the banks some basis to look at that primary source of repayment on their loans, and then maybe they'll get more comfortable on these pure play deals or a combination thereof, that they don't necessarily have to have all the security in the world just to, outside to do the project. And I think if the OPA would do that, it would really help educate the banks and bring the banks to the table faster than what we've seen in the last year and a half.
It's good to see the big five at the table, and we'll talk about that again in a moment. Steve?
I think instability can create unknowns. And as someone who insures risk, we always have an element of unknown. However, the more knowns that we have, the better off everybody in this room is. The fundamental point of insurance is the spread of risk. And as long as there's uncertainty, the projects are not going to continue, and at best, they're not going to get completed. Everybody in this room pays too much for insurance, so do I. But the best thing we can do to help everybody is to spread that risk out and create a much more certain playing environment for us all. And in doing so, what that'll do is give us a better feeling and a better will towards the risk itself. And as long as we know, we got to get some statistics on this. Often brokers and clients ask me, where have you seen the losses? Well, we haven't seen very many because there's not a lot out there so far. We need better data. Sometimes brokers say to me, okay, you've given me X as my insurance cost. Did you get that from a dice? And I say, well, no, we have come up with an idea of where it came from. We do have global statistics, but we don't have a lot of local statistics. And if we can create a better spread of risk, which will be direct from some stability in our actual fit 2.0 product, I think it'll benefit everybody from the wind developers and the solar developers. And it'll also get more people potentially investing as they see a much more secure insurance platform. Right now, I can only speak on behalf of one company, but I often have brokers that's telling me, well, we have 7 companies we deal with, and all 7 are giving me drastically different prices. Yet with home and auto, the pricing might change 5, 8. You have a 10% change in insurance costs, people raise their eyes and say, well, how come this company did this, his company did this? In the renewable energy field, you have drastic changes of insurance costs, and that's because nobody has the statistical background yet to determine what should it really cost. And we're taking a risk, as are the banks. And if we can solid up the stability and decrease some of the unknowns, get the actual installs in place and turn them to operational and get a couple of years under our belt, my personal feeling is, prior to this, I insured construction and contracting projects. And in the end, solar installs, both rooftop and ground mount, are not that dangerous. You get the proper engineering on the roof and you take out the danger of the engineering of a roof collapsing, it is not an overly dangerous risk. And we need to be able to prove that to our global headquarters to in turn bring down your insurance costs. And if we can get more manufacturers into this province, one of the things we've talked about is the cost per kilowatt. Well, we insure based on replacement cost. And if we set up a 10 kilowatt system that 2 years ago cost $95,000, and we charge you a price on a $95,000 replacement cost. If that same 10 kilowatt system today is $65,000, my price per dollar hasn't changed, but your cost has just decreased a third. So if we can get the costs to come down and in turn the replacement cost of the systems to come down through bringing in manufacturing or through whatever mechanism we can do to bring down the cost of the systems, that in turn turns into savings for the consumer.
So Steve, let me push back a bit on your notion that, agreed, small sample size, n equals 1, very difficult to do a risk calculation, but surely your global parent has experience.
We do.
Right? So can't you leverage that sample size?
We get some great data for wind, and we get some great data for some of the ground mount. In Europe, what we've seen is a lot less rooftop development. And because home construction is so different in each region, just in Ontario, never mind in the world, it's tough to take rooftop exposures from different areas in the world when your geographic conditions are different, your weather conditions are different, and your building materials are different to give us a true indication of Canadian risk standards. Yes, we can get a base, and that is why we are Canada's leading insurer with our competitors out there, is because we do have data from the world. But my job, in order to write more business, is to offer the cheapest price of insurance and still make a profit. And in order to do so, if I can use some statistical background to my superiors and say, no, I think X should actually be Y, and which is a little bit cheaper than X, but come up with the right reasons for it, that means my company can write more business and in turn save a little bit to the consumer. So the best way to do so is to get the best accurate data from around here. And even if we start talking ground mount systems, wind turbines, weather is generally the number one exposure for large loss. We can always have a little bit of vandalism. But I quickly reflected back to the very few losses we've had, but a couple of the losses we have had have been direct related to wind this past April in the southwestern corridor. This area is receiving weather and more specifically wind greater than in historical averages. So we need some real local statistical data to come up with the best prices, because right now we are very fortunate that I can pull from my UK team and get some pricing, and with that team write a lot of risk. But we don't live in the UK. Our houses aren't built in the UK. We don't have the winds and the sun that the UK does. So therefore the best way to create an insurance price is to create some data from our local areas, and to do so we need some operational systems. We've insured a lot of installs. Unfortunately, I can count potentially on one hand the amount of them that have turned to operation. Most of them are done and complete, but they're sitting in a phase of, well, they're installed, the inverters are showing power, in theory they can create energy, but they don't have a grid connection yet. And without that grid connection, they're not operational yet, you guys aren't making money, and in turn, we're not making money because the real money is in your 20-year contract. We hope that with good loss results, we can relatively seamlessly renew year after year and hope that we can all make a nice 20-year profit on this.
Chris, do you want to jump in there?
No.
Oh, okay, you look like. Just to be clear, Steve, are you talking about insurance in terms of loss to equipment, or do you also get into the business of performance warrant insurance for the banks?
Performance. Did you say performance warranty?
Performance warranty, I did, yes. Performance
Geez.
warranty. Did you get into that business? Performance warranty.
That is taboo
For innovative
talk.
new technologies, performance warranties for the new technologies. Did you get into that business?
No, RSA Canada, RSA Global is not into insuring performance warranties. You still need to have an insurable loss. Because the sun didn't shine as much as last month or the wind did not blow as much as expected, we can't insure against
but a
the unknown.
performance warranty can be independent of sun and wind. So, but in any case, it's not equipment performance that you're involved in. It's whether or not it gets hit by lightning and it's a write-off.
Correct. It's first.
Right, okay.
It's physical damage. Now we also cover the equipment breakdown of it if the equipment breaks down, of course. But in the way of a piece of equipment not performing to its intended display, no, that is not something that Canadian insurers, the standard Canadian insurer. There are some European specialists. I believe London potentially offers a product for that. The colleagues that I've spoke with, the developers that we've spoke with, and the brokers that we've spoke with who's went and priced it, right now, I've been told it's not the most it's not very price friendly, let's just say that. But as far as Canadian insurers, and my company specifically, Royal and Sun Alliance, we don't have any type of insurance towards performance warranties or performance guarantees.
Okay. John, just quickly, I want to go back to the Big Five took a while to play. I understand why. The Big Five, you're conservative banks, and that's why we weathered the storm so well. So hats off to conservatism. However, took you a long time to dance. You're now at the table. Did the recent instability make you step back a bit? Are you still building internal capacity to invest in renewables? And how's the review process affecting that? I presume you're still going full speed ahead under the review process. You're not waiting for 2.0 to build capacity, are you?
Even the last couple of months, talking to a colleague in Toronto this morning, indicating that the applications that we're assessing, adjudicating, and approving have gone up in the last couple of months. So very busy, but obviously any approvals would be conditional on those applications or the notice to proceeds coming in, waiting for the review.
So on that note, and just quickly, because I know it could be a long discussion, but give me some highlights, and we'll go down very practical brass tacks. There's people in the audience who are looking to build wind, solar, biogas plants. Give me the top 3, maybe top 5 characteristics you need to see before you're going to consider debt capital.
As I said, a secondary source of repayment, for whatever reason, that the primary revenue stream was interrupted or canceled. So to Steve's point, he's seen a few projects assembled but haven't been able to connect, so no revenue being generated. How are you going to pay the interest? So you need to demonstrate that. Also, proven supplier in terms of ownership on the land. We probably, unless a related party owned the land, we wouldn't do kind of a leased land solar project. And just, again, the general security on outside assets, just as a secondary source of repayment. I
presume you look at the management team. Can we bring in some nutty managers to you? Is that okay? Or
everybody says it's easy. It's plug and play, and that's it. You just collect your check. But that obviously has some bearing.
Sorry,
can I say something? Yeah. So you're telling me that Canadian banks are offering more than 5-year terms now?
We've done the interest rate can be set generally from 1 to 5 years, but we're doing 10 years on equipment financing, amortizations, and if it's real estate secured, we'll do up to 20 to 25 years.
So you're not?
Sorry, you said?
No, European banks give 15-year terms.
Hold the tweet.
Amortization or fixed rate?
Terms. So let's say 7% for 15 years.
Yeah, well, it'll...
So you don't have to buy swaps?
Yeah, if we do a swap, we'll do it over 5 years, yeah.
So 7?
So we'll do 15, 10, 13, depending on the amortization, yeah.
Okay.
Do I hear 11? I hear 15. Do I hear 11?
But usually on a bank's cost of funds, it'll be 1 to 5 years, but swaps for a sophisticated lender or borrowers who are used to that and understand the inherent risk in that, we'll offer that.
Just to build on the banker's point, our friend, what do we look for when we look at a risk? A lot of this is new to the country, new to the province. So what we want to do is we want to look at Who's the developer? Do they have some worldwide experience? Or if so, do they have access to some worldwide experience? Second, we look at who's the manufacturer of the product. With the wind, last presentation with Enercon, they're one of our top suppliers. We give them, if your developer is bringing in an Enercon product, you're going to get some preferential treatment. In the solar side, we want to see that the developer has a contingency plan in place. Thankfully, with solar, if your panel supplier went down, there is readily available lots of panels now, which is a nice thing that brings down our risk. But I think the single most important thing with your development, and potentially sometimes through cost-saving measures is the one that's overlooked, is who's the installer. And we really want to, I will underwrite to death the installer. And when you come to your broker for a potential insurance quote, I'm not going to say don't say it's still to be determined, but if you really want that preferred price, give full description of who's actually installing your project. It's very important to us. There are some long-time installers in this country. They've come from other companies, Germany, for example. Down in California, they've been doing it for a while. Over northern sections of Europe's been doing it for a while. So we really do look at who's the installer and what's their experience, because in the end, 20 years of operational will often rely on who installed that. And especially when we talk about wind, those things, they're not supposed to topple. So let's make sure the contractor who's doing the foundation is not a road contractor who knows how to put concrete paving in. Let's make sure they have a little bit of experience. And thankfully on the wind side, the developers themselves, as well as the manufacturers, put a lot of restrictions in place in order for you to get that manufacturer's warranty that covers the specifics on who's installing it. And many times it's their own installers or their own preferred installers who've been trained. In the solar side, you don't quite get that same control. So on the solar side, be very careful who you guys choose as your installers. Make sure you've done your homework, and your insurance company will price it properly accordingly.
So unless somebody else wants to jump on that, I'm going to change the channel a little bit, and this will broaden it out so everyone can have a response. Did anybody see the West Wing episode where the wind guys and the solar guys and I think it was maybe ethanol guys all come into the Oval Office and they all begin bickering amongst themselves, and they're clearly a highly divided industry? Yeah, Dennis has seen that. It's really interesting in the last election campaign. This is obviously a new industry. It's highly fractured, yet it involves the legal community. I see my friends from Blake's are here. It involves the financial community, the insurance industry. It involves the manufacturing industries. It involves many different biogas, wind, hydro, solar. So there's a whole number of players, highly fractured, and a bunch of NGOs who are in it for the environmental reasons as well. They're all at the table. There's a huge number of people involved in this space, a lot of whom are making a lot of money. How many billion moving into this sector? 26 is the last number I heard moving into this sector. That's huge, right? That's big industry. Yet the advocacy that comes out of this group is highly fractured and very well-meaning, but doesn't even come close to the kind of professionalism you see on behalf of the Keystone XL pipeline, for example. Love it or hate it, those guys are professionals at public relations and at government lobbying. How is it that given the different interests, so wind has one problem, there's an aesthetic problem in the rural areas. Solar's got another problem because people hate the 80 cents. I can defend both, that's not my point. But rather than arguing for ourselves, how is it that we become an industry who gets represented as an industry that represents dozens of billions of dollars in all kinds of sectors, from legal to manufacturing? How is it we become more cohesive in our advocacy, and what should that advocacy look like, both to the government in Feed-in Tariff 2.0, because we can do these panels all we want, everyone's got their point of view. It's very difficult to have a cohesive white paper emerging from the industry as a whole, because we're fractured. And then also our requests to the government to say, here's how I think you should be fixing some of the public relations campaigns on all of our behalfs, not on the behalf of the wind or the solar or the banks or whoever. How do we become cohesive, guys? Anybody got any bright ideas?
Maybe we should hire the CAAPP. You know, those great commercials.
You know, whoever their PR, that's actually, I know you. I think it's a brilliant idea. I spent the weekend with a group called Cape Farewell, and it's about climate scientists and artists getting together, because scientists don't know how to communicate to the public, but artists do. So Ian McEwan's novel came out of this in Britain, and so on, solar. So it's about communications. And we had one of the brightest ad guys in the country, and it's Chatham House rules, so I can't say who it is. But the guy's brilliant, and he's a gun for hire, and he's done some really interesting work for the other side. And he was an idea machine, right? So getting that person on board to generate things like what CAP's been able to do, what TransAlta can do, what Enbridge is going to do on the West Coast. So sure, we can hire a hired gun, but how is it that we get together and agree on what we're telling that hired gun? And how aggressive do we want to be in defending our industry?
I think we need to talk about the cost of peak power. That's a real cost to everybody.
Again, because I'm not sure you got heard.
Okay, I think we need to talk about peak power and the cost of peak power and educate the public. That's what we need to get into the hands of people. The cost of an avoided watt is worth a lot when you're paying $2 a watt for natural gas generated electricity from Ohio. So that's something that needs to get into the public.
It's really interesting, Tom. I'm participating in another conversation that takes place at the Garrison Institute in Hudson Valley, New York, and about particularly around climate change and behavioral science and psychology of all these sort of things and the politics that arise from it. And one of the misnomers we've got is that people respond only to economic things, that we've thought in the last 200 years that we have so-called economic man or economic person, I guess, and that's not true. We make most of our decisions on non-economic grounds, but we've convinced ourselves that we do. I think that as we move forward, you're absolutely right to be raising this. Each of the sort of renewable energy verticals, industries, don't stand a snowball's chance in hell against much, much, much bigger and more powerful incumbents. I haven't looked at the numbers here, but I know that in Washington, D.C., it's 250 to 1. So for everybody who's advocating renewables, there's 250 people on the other side of the table. It's not a fair fight, and it's not a fight you're going to win most of the time. I think that as we move forward, one of the challenges that we've got is that, rightly or wrongly, the perception is green, love it, too bad we can't afford it, right? Especially when we got to fund education and health and child poverty and all this sort of stuff. So I think we have to have more of what I call a green tea party approach. We've got to be perceived as part of the solution to the fiscal mess that we're in, and not another way in which we're going to add more debt for our kids or grandkids, and which means we've got to change the understanding of the economics, around peak power, deferred expenses in other ways, community empowerment, and integrate this into the broader reformation, industrial reformation that we know we're in the midst of. So the idea of hooking this into next generation automobiles, so we don't go from 16,000 people employed in the auto sector in Oshawa down to 4,000 people, and still we bail them out, right? I mean, that's just insane. So it is part of a bigger narrative. It has to be around that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem fiscally. And it has to be, and then we've got to get the stories right, and it's not just about the economics, even though I'm somebody who lives, sleeps, and breathes economics.
I was just going to say, you need some early wins with these FIT projects that are up and running. They have to be tied in. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. You've got the developer, you've got the community, you've got the insurance, the lawyers, the banks, the accountants. So if they're doing projects, they're coming to fruition, they're generating money, and all these stakeholders are making money and benefiting economically, then it's just going to self-perpetuate. It'll build into something, and then you can, if you want to advocate, at least you have some a track record to stand from.
I mean, I actually think we need some, good comedians too. I mean, when you were talking about the fact that, project costs for renewable energy projects are going up because of extreme weather events. I mean, when do we start to join the dots? We all sound like Don Rumsfeld up here. It's like the known unknowns or the unknown knowns or whatever it is. So we probably need to get like the comedy troops involved, probably more than anything else. Where's Russell Peters when you need him, right?
Look at that solar panel.
I actually think there's something to that, right? That's why it's artists and scientists at Cape Farewell, not scientists and financiers, right? That it's the artists, and there were comedians there, and they were funny, who can bring climate change into the zeitgeist of our culture. And in the same way, I think we as an industry need to become part of the zeitgeist of our culture. But and I'm just throwing this out there. I think we need to do it as a cohesive unit rather than a bunch of disaggregated voices, right? If the banks are at the table and there's $20 billion of debt capital flowing, wow, you got a stake in the ground, right? And one can't ask banks to sort of partake in political discussions. That's not what they do. But perhaps they do marketing all the time. They're good at what they do. So perhaps as we become an aggregate as opposed to aggregates, then we can have a lot of different voices that bring a lot of respectability to the claim that we're part of mainstream economics now. Mainstream economics. We're not a sideshow. Insurance. You got anything to say about this?
Well, I think the biggest thing in this is to get the public on board, and that's the public that's not in this room. I think John made a good point that we have to get some of these completed. We always hear the phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. Well, I think it's a big thing to actually have some operational active wind farms and solar farms in the area to show people that they are okay, that they're not a big scare that potentially some of the other groups are trying to put them out and make them out to be. I think what a lot of it has to do is have the community better understand how they can participate in these programs so that it's not just the big developer that came from abroad. We don't know who they are, where they're from, but we know they're making lots of our money and we know our taxes are going up. That's not the message we want to send to the public. Some of the biggest things, as great as these events are, is we got to make sure the rest of the public is informed that the renewable energy can benefit us all and not just the current large developers. And I do agree that getting, as silly as it may be, getting some common public interest, whether it's a comedian or whether we need somebody on board that we can all identify with to push our message. Because as much as we're up here trying to advocate it, I think in the end, the public wants someone that they can identify with. And I think once that happens, and once this snowball starts, and so many of these that are in construction right now get completed, and you start seeing the small communities benefiting from them, right through to, as our friend from Toronto earlier stated, that the Toronto large community is also working on it. If you can get the smallest to the largest communities all working on it, and you can get the people that right now are uninformed, that not necessarily are against it, but that you just don't know any better, have a lot of times people will just follow the pack. And if the pack says that this is good and that this will benefit us all, then many more will follow. And sometimes it's just coming down to that simple approach. And I honestly think that right now we have towards Windsor on the 401, we have a lot of wind that's happening down there. And I constantly have my friends and associates say, did you insure that project? Did you guys do that project? Because they see it. And the more that people see and the more that people will relate to, I think the better cohesiveness we can bring together as an industry.
I think that's a great idea. And I know on the notion of showing that it's okay, I know James Lovelock famously once said, you can bury some nuclear waste in my backyard, I'm not that worried about it. He's a big fan of nuclear. As a resident of Prince Edward County, near all the wind concern folks, I happily volunteer my backyard for great big 3-megawatt wind turbines. If anybody wants to put it up, you can put it in my backyard. So I want to open it up to the audience now. You've heard enough from us. There are 2 microphones here. Please just line up. And I would ask you, by all means, have a point to make, but keep it brief and ask a question. Just before we go to the audience, though, I want to throw one more thing to our panel, and maybe each in turn. The feed-in tariff is essentially a government, the government is your counterparty on a contract. That's a pretty solid piece of financial, a pretty solid financial tool. Do we need something on top of that? Do we also need loan guarantees? Do we need PACE bonds? Does everything else become redundant once we keep and commit to the feed-in tariff, or does it need to be colored with some other financial support from the government? Does anybody want to take a stab at that? Chris.
Personally, I don't think it needs any loan guarantees like in the U.S. That's why the feed-in tariff is great, because it actually, what we've got is a AA, Ontario-backed bonds basically that pays for it. What possibly could help on the microfit contract is have assignability, but that's
have what?
Assignability.
Assignability.
Yeah,
assignability. Can you explain what that is?
Basically, allow contract holders to assign it to other people. Okay. The other thing is to have secured lenders' rights, which is not non-existent in the market fit contract.
Does feed-in tariff cover all bases, or do we need something else?
I think currently,
On the project side, innovators can have a separate conversation.
I think from the project construction side, the guarantee that the government is willing to give with both our local banks as well as the European banks that are more than willing to offer their funds from the insurance perspective, I mean, my company has seen enough stability there for us to move forward in providing a solid product that we didn't just mishap together. I mean, for the money that we've put together for specialized wording, specialized applications, specialized inspectors through to underwriters, I think the proper procedures are in place through the banking and the government. So I'd say from my company standpoint, I think the mechanism is enough for us to be comfortable to offer the smallest homeowner through to the largest project. We have the comfort there.
Nick?
I think the only issue is, is the political stability, right? It's great, government backs it, but if you can reverse that, or the next government can come in and reverse it, then you got a big problem. And that's true, in so many different ways, in so many different parts of North America right now with things green.
A stable fit, clearly, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything on your side that would...
We don't want somebody to have a fit.
I would just say...
that's such... Sorry.
It would. My answer, it depends. It's on a case-by-case basis. If the developer has a proven management track record in other businesses, they're successful, they have a good equity base, they know what they're doing, it's a low loan to value, well then we don't need anything maybe other than the fit pricing. But if it's unproven, no other cash flow, or it's on perhaps we've participated in a First Nations project as well, you have no recourse to go after your security, then a government guarantee does help. Something to supplement just the guarantee.
So on a project-by-project basis, you could see it bumped up, but as an overlying policy, it does what it needs to do if the project team brings what they need to bring.
That's correct.
So 4 thumbs up on the feed-in tariff does the job, right? Okay, let's go to the audience. This gentleman, I think here was first up.
Yeah, the 5 of you up there capitulated very, very quickly on the cheap manufacturing in China story. And no, all 5 of you did. You just throw up your hand and say, we can't compete.
Nick defended quite vociferously.
Okay. All right. So I would like to refer to what Steve said, that his company will give you preferential rates if you install an Enercon wind turbine. Not a Chinese one, an Enercon one made by the expensive labor of Germany. And I would like you to consider that aside from cheap labor, China is famous for 2 other things. The enormous pollution of its factories and the crappy quality of its products. Surely a green industry can capitalize on the idea that a product is well made, will last a long time, and doesn't pollute.
Well, absolutely. So the argument being, the market may sort that out. So if you're right, then you're right. Absolutely. Okay.
Nobody said we were focused on Chinese products. I didn't say that.
All right.
No, what I said was there's already enough bankable product out there so that we don't have to develop our own here. That's what I said. It's a different story.
I just want to thank the panel for speaking to us today. This is directed to everyone. Do you feel a single unified NGO to lobby the government and get the message out to the public would be more effective than what we have now?
Yes. And I'll recommend one if you like.
And how to recommend one, please. And how do we do this?
Well, no, I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm not going to recommend right now.
Why not?
Nope. That's why. Anyway, go ahead, Dick.
Nope.
No? Yeah, but no, I think a single unified voice clearly asks for a single overarching group to do it.
And how would that take place? How do you foresee that taking place? Right now we have a fragmented NGO. There's many NGOs claiming to be the voice for solar in Ontario. Wouldn't one be enough? And
Here.
And it's not just solar. It's like solar, wind, biogas, hydro, finance, insurance. I mean, so it's a multivariate grid of business interests that are involved. And I think the only way to tie them together is a single unified NGO. And I think what you do is you hold a competitive bid process. You say, here's the $50 million that we're going to put towards this over the next 10 years, and who wants to bid on it? Who's going to bring forward the best proposal? I mean, that's how you do it, right?
Because the other energy industries are not divided.
No, they're not. They're not. No, I think that's a fabulous suggestion. I think a competitive bid would be the best way to do it, right? I mean,
I like it.
this gentleman right here is next, I think.
I'm Glenn Molnar with Community Renewable Energy Waterloo, and we're about conservation right from spending nothing through to renewable energy options. We're a not-for-profit, all-volunteer organization. We do a lot of things in the community, including teaching kids how to conserve energy using a power toolkit, or an energy toolkit. They take it home, they do it with their parents, they come back and report the findings. We always look at what motivates the kids. Well, we find on average 50 to 60% of the kids in the classroom have breathing issues. We pursue that to find out where the causes are and what their physician said the cause was, and it ties directly into the pollution that we've created with our coal-fired plants, et cetera. A lot of detail on that, a lot of information on it, but it blows the teachers and us and the kids in the class away knowing that that's the case. And what happens is it highly motivates them. So I just want to make that point. We also work with the average consumer, the average household, wondering how they can be part of the solution. And when they hear the price that's paid, well, isn't that too expensive? Well, then we have to have a way of understanding what that cost really is, and how does that compare to the real cost of energy, which many of us don't know. Most of us don't know that. So how are we going to get to that? And I think we've talked about it on our webinars and so on with OSEA, lifetime costing of the various technologies, and how does that compare? And then, are you part of the solution or part of the problem? So if you want to put solar on your roof, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem by increasing the cost of that electricity to other ratepayers, if you understand where I'm going on this? So that's the struggle, the tension that's out there. We hear a lot about that expense being loaded on the ratepayer because of renewable energy. Those of us that are closest to it know it's not the case. But how do we get that out in a transparent way? And I think you're on it, getting the right people to put that information out there in ways that people actually latch onto it and understand the facts, and then realize there are better ways of doing this. And we're on it. We're chasing that, and we need to work together in getting that information out there so everybody wins. Right now we have a lot of fraction, a lot of breakdown in that conversation because people don't know the truth. And when you bring it up and talk about it, then they begin to get a handle on it, and they realize, we pay a lot more if we peak out and we have to go across the border to buy electricity, or we run the peaker plant. That's way beyond what solar costs, and that's the highest price we have in the FIT program, microfit. Anyway, I'd like to see you respond to that in a way that, how can we get that true cost of electricity? When I hear somebody say, I just want to pay what the real cost is, we know the answer, and they don't want to hear it. Okay, so how do we get that out there in such a way that it wakes them up and gets them into action of some kind or another, or at least getting behind the program and looking forward on green energy?
I know it's going to be hard for people to accept, but that whole thing, the last election, they talked about the meters, smart meters, getting rid of them because it's costing us too much, and who can tell my mother to do her laundry at 7? Actually, it's true. That's the problem. So we should charge more for electricity during the daytime. That's the answer. And then people will say, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. That's the way to do it. That's how I do it.
Nick?
Yeah, you're provoking me here in a debate. First of all, we have to have a common base of information, all of us here. How serious is climate change and what do we have to do? How serious is the growth of a whole new green economy and how important is it to us to be part of that, etc. But then it comes down to, ultimately, there are two different views on how government and how we need to play this. I'm not a big believer that intergenerational educational programs are going to get us where we need to go in the time frame we have. I think we've got to do that stuff, but I actually think we're in a much more urgent situation where we've got to act now. So the question becomes for me, do we have massive government subsidy in the sense of a FIT program, or do we just simply say no? Government does not have the ability to intervene in the market, in the economy directly, but it does have the ability to put a price on things. It does have the ability to set standards. right? Every building, new building needs to be a net zero energy building, and we need a price on carbon that moves the market, $60 a ton, whatever. And we're not going to subsidize everything because whatever money we got left over has got to go into repairing the leaking roofs at XYZ university or college. So that's the debate for me, and it's a really urgent one, and it needs to be a grown-up conversation. And we haven't talked about the media, who didn't do a very good job, but I felt did a better job in the election than I expected them to, in terms of, trying to zero in on this. It was the smart meter. What was it? An energy tax? I mean, come on. Yeah. So it's a different quality of conversation that I think we're having. I personally believe, and I'll put it right out there, that in the next 10, 20 years in North America, governments are not going to have the money to intervene in markets in the way that we've grown up and used to. But where we can agree, whether we're conservatives or liberals or progressives, quote unquote, is that we should pay for what we use. We should pay for the pollution we create. And that's a price on carbon. And that's got to happen. And we're futzing around that.
Yeah. In the absence of a price on carbon, everything else is a Band-Aid. I mean, anybody who knows economics knows that. But unfortunately, all we have are Band-Aids right now. And we're not going to get the cure because Harper's been very clear about that. We're not having a price on carbon. Stop talking is what he's actually said.
I say
stop.
Remove the perverse subsidies.
Yeah.
Remove the perverse subsidies.
Yeah.
Stop subsidizing things we don't want to see happen and put a price on things, and let the market go to work.
I've got a question. Were any of you at the think tank at the Perimeter Institute back in early summer?
We met there.
Oh, we did. Do you remember the summary of that panel? The panel that said, what are we going to do? If we wait for 30 years, we won't be here, so that's kind of pointless. The magic bullet won't be here on time. What we need to do is do what we already know. That was the conclusion of the panel. So really we're saying we better get on what we know, and we know this. How do we convince politically, the bureaucracy that we need to move in that direction and find a way that's palatable and get the job done? Like we're talking about eco-energy where we insulate our houses properly. Government leads the way by doing it with all government buildings. We set the fact with energy. I mean, we get onto it with the idea of a tax, but we can save. And with our power saving toolkit with CREW, the average household saves 25% if they pursue the solution. And yet they'll grumble about a few percent increase in their electricity bill. So it's a really,
An adult conversation about climate change would help.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, the public. We live in a democracy. We're not going to get the policy that will fix this problem unless the public asks for it. That's why we require captains of industry to step forward and have an adult conversation about climate change.
What's really interesting is the insurance policy. The writer of that policy saying climate change is causing a lot of increase in rate. Okay, we look at Thailand, how it's being impacted. Bingo. Well, hey, more severe weather than they've ever had. Look what's happening to them. You can
Tom,
translate that all over the world.
This is where the insurance industry has played, to their great credit, and can play a huge role. I remember one of the first COP meetings many, many years ago in Bonn, and the insurance industry, thanks to a friend of mine in London who was dating somebody who worked at Lloyd's, let's call a spade here, and the Lloyd's people turned up and were shocked at how industry and business was being represented, and decided to get engaged and did their own research. And if you go to Swiss Re and Munich Re, the people that back all the stuff that you do, that nobody's done better homework on this. And the insurance industry, I mean, you guys are sober, serious people. Well, during the day.
Right now.
And when you're on stage up here, sort of thing. And if anybody, I mean, if London, Ontario becomes the epicenter of environmental, climate activism in Ontario, that moves things. So maybe we don't need Russell Peters. Maybe we need the CEO of our largest insurance company to get up there and say, hey, hang on. Not only is this good business for us, but this is absolutely material.
Thank you.
We're going to move to another question, but just before that, actually, I think the fellow who addressed the China issue, I've been thinking about that for a second, and it's not a matter of capitulating to whether they win or not. It's a market. I think, though, that when we talk about banks and debt capital, being ultimately the market movers as to which technology gets installed. It's the conservatism of debt capital that is capable of ultimately filtering out, if it's true that it's crappy technology, then you won't get 20-year debt on it. So I think at the end of the day, while debt capital to us innovators is a barrier for innovation getting into the market, it's ultimately a filter to ensure that the technology that does get there will work. And if we are capable of building better products, then our banks will provide debt for them, and it'll be in the market that gets tested. So I think we do have a filter, and it's ultimately debt capital that will look to that technology. Yes.
Hi, Tom.
I'm sorry, and I should give you a chance to comment on that. I'm sorry. Like I just put words in your mouth, right? I mean,
that was excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Laurie Aaron with Community Power Fund, and so we're all about removing financial barriers for community power projects. And there was a discussion earlier about the need for loan guarantees, and I think from the perspective of a community power project, like a renewable energy co-op, they may be able to raise 30, 40% equity or whatever percent equity, a fairly high amount of equity, but they don't have anything other than the project. There is no personal guarantee there. There is no retained earnings there. And so my question to the panel is, assuming that they can get bridge financing to take them to the point where they are connected to the grid and they are earning revenue on their FIT contract, what would it take for them to get debt put in place? Do they need a loan guarantee? Do they need to have a lender other than a bank or someone who insists on having other sources of equity or other revenue in place?
So just before I turn to TD to answer that question, I think it's actually, we started this panel by talking about how screwed up the political landscape got because rural Ontario did not feel included, right, in the Green Energy Act. They felt like something was imposed on them, and we have to admit that, right? One of the answers is community ownership of power. So the fact that community groups, and I know that you and Deb are both knee-deep in that stuff, so I take at face value the problem that you face. Even bridge financing, I bet, is hard. How is it that our big five, who do have a public mandate to make money in our economy, who may have a bit of a fiduciary duty back, how might we better engage our big five to step up to the plate when you don't have a balance sheet, it's community power? How might we better engage you, our banking heroes?
That's a good question. I like the fact that you said, arranging bridge financing before you came to a bank to get debt capital, because we've seen just in one project in particular, there was a few $100,000 in cost overruns in the construction process, so you have to have the pockets to fund that. So obviously you'd have to deal with that with the bridge financing lender. But I know banks are openly low-risk lenders. They'll tell you that up front, and so they like a track record for that primary source of repayment. So I go back to my point, if the OPA could share more information on these systems that are up and running, generating the stable revenue that you've projected, that helps. But to me, I think you need like that bridge lender to at least carry that debt until you've got a year's track record. Because just like in any new business, outside of renewable energy, if you want working capital financing, project financing, a bank's going to say, look, we want the business to have been around for at least 2 years before we look at it. It's going to be something similar. And I know the window here is short, so it's tough. So I think that there has to be a bit of a balance.
I'm just wondering, the big thing, is this on? The big thing to me is, I don't think this is on. There we go. The big thing to me is even if you have just a couple of months of data, like 3 or 6 months of data, then you can compare that to other systems. Like you can look at the weather and what other systems produce in that time, and you can say, oh yes, this system does produce this much for this weather. Yeah. Because a year is a long time to have that bridge loan outstanding. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if, I guess you can't really make this decision, but it seems to me that as soon as you're producing some power, you can look at a standardized system and say, oh, that produced this much, this system produced this much, so we can now project, way into the future. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at another industry, the healthcare industry, build retirement homes. They construct the retirement home over 18 months, but then you lease it. The residents sign up leases. It has to be stabilized. So, I mean, that can take 3 years. So 2 months may be a long time.
Yeah, but the power starts cranking out full steam right as soon as you connect it.
But I think there's a balance. And you made a good point, too. If it's a low loan-to-value request, I think that's a discussion the bank has to look at. And, but if it was high ratio financing, 100%, I think it's different. But if it's 50% dollar or 50-cent dollars, I think it's a discussion, and there could be merit there.
What about the 49% you can bring as non-community power? So if you brought a TransAlta as the table as your counterparty on the equity side, everything else looked the same, but TransAlta had said, I have enough faith in these people and this technology and this site to take half, roughly, of the equity. Is that not enough to give the bank some comfort? I mean,
I would think it's tough to get TransAlta to do that, though.
Right. No, maybe it's another pathway. Leverage that 49%, you get the kicker, you have community ownership, and you brought a big balance sheet to the table.
We're looking at a project similar situation.
Yeah,
Somebody
okay.
has a track record, come in, own a piece of the project, and you're giving up a little, but at least you're getting something.
And to bring them to the table, you give them a piece of your kicker, right? So of the penny, they're going to take a piece of that, more than their 49%. But what they bring to the table is their balance sheet and the ability to get debt. So maybe that's part of the. Maybe we'll talk offline. I don't know, but that's a key issue in moving feed-in tariff 2.0 forward and engaging the rural community to give us the political stability that we want. Right. That's the big picture question right there. I just want to point out.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Kittle from Frontenac County. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists. A very interesting discussion. But I would like to point out that coming to these conferences is a bit like coming to the choir practice, in the sense that everyone is preaching to the choir. And I'd like to put in a bid for having some sort of PR subgroup within OSEA that would put out more regularly things like that excellent video that we saw this morning. More simple messaging. I think the messaging has to be simple, because the messaging on the other side is simple. And not just rural people, but I've talked to people that I know in the area where I am. One is a PhD in microbiology, and the other one is a professional accountant. And they, among others, have said to me, oh, you're in green energy. Oh, we think it's terrible that people are being paid 80 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's where it stops. That's their understanding of the problem, because that's the messaging that they have received. And we have to be equally simple on our side. That complicated messaging is not understood. It's not something that people are going to take away, and really it's not going to resonate with them. So that was the main point I wanted to make, and I guess it's not a question, it's just a request, I guess, of OSEA, and a suggestion that would help. I do have another really funny story that was told to me by an installer local in our area, that it was about 10 years ago. He bought a Prius, and there was very few of them around, and he came from a local family that was into the fuel oil business. And so he went to a family party, and one of the cousins came up to him, and he said, an example of simple messaging, so how's that Prius working out for you? And we hear they're killing deaf people because they can't, the electric vehicles, because they can't hear them coming, they said. So that was a very good example of a very simple message. Totally wrong, but...
Simple messaging, professionalize our brand. Now, Nicole's here, so she heard you loud and clear, and we'll pass that on to Chris Stevens as well, because I think we've heard that echoed a number of times.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
For being here. And, are you familiar with Sky Power?
Sure, a lot of their developments, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, too bad the Lord OPA is not here. But, Sky Power, it's a funny thing that their address is actually 130 Adelaide Street. And the Ontario Power Authority is like 120 Adelaide Street. It's like, wow. The guys basically have like so many projects, right, that were approved basically since last year. And that's too bad, talking about the capacity, right, that we have right now, and that's why we're here. We're struggling, but, somebody, I guess, was smart enough, or the pockets were big enough, right, to put those projects on. Anyway, my question is to John. John, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how the local distribution company, right, gives the rate to the end user. If you're not familiar, they send a report, right, to the homeowner or the corporation, whatever, with the amount of energy they produced, and that's how they get paid. So basically, if I am able to give you a 1 year, year and a half, let's say 2 years, okay, of proven energy production, right? And the amount of money that the end user is going to be making. You're saying that the banks, in this case, can put something together to take the Ontario Power Authority contract as a collateral for insecure loan?
Can you, in your example, any idea of the loan amount, or are you just talking anything?
Yeah, anything. Because in solar energy, it is so good that the return obviously overpasses the interest rate. So normally in most of, bring my point back to Sky Power. Why are they doing it? Why are they investing so much? Well, easy, because it's a very good return, right? So basically, we've been already 2 years in the program, and banks are still saying, oh, we don't have enough data. It's like, well, when? So if I am able to give you proven data from the local distribution company, okay, and proven data that I give to my customer on his return, right, for 2 years, you should be able, for, 20, 10, as many sites as you want, you should be able to put a package together and say, listen, guys, unless the sun doesn't come out, these people aren't going to make money, period.
It's a good question. It's hard maybe to comprehend the fact that, geez, I've got a guaranteed revenue stream. Here it is. Here's the data. So I guess I would come back that you have to have a secondary source. Just for whatever reason, that got interrupted, even for a month, 2 months, 6 months, and I don't know how it would, or it got reduced, the system. Do you have an ability to repay that? Not that you would ever touch that secondary source. Do you have that ability?
Absolutely, yes.
And number two, I would say that when you do a goodwill financing, so there's no real security, it's just cash flow lending, well, the banks will do that, but then they want to get paid maybe over 2-3 years. So I'd say to you, okay, I'll give you that money, but you're going to pay me back in 2 to 3 years, and then the rest, that money's yours. But what I found in the cash flow stream of some of these projects we've done, there's not enough free cash flow to pay a bank back on a traditional cash flow loan in 2 to 3 years. It'll take 6, 7, maybe 10 years to do that. It all depends on the cost of the development. I know if you already have the building or the land and it's not included, it's a little different. But so I would say to you, okay, we'll do that, but how about you pay us back in 2 to 3 years? Does that work? And potentially we could have that discussion.
So you know what's interesting is when I asked the panel, is the feed-in tariff enough? Everybody said yes. And then we go to the audience, and more than once we've heard the feed-in tariff is not enough, right? So I think there's a disconnect, and I think that the people up here need to learn and take on board the idea that the feed-in tariff is not enough. It's enough conceptually, but in the real world it isn't. So we need some sort of microloan financing program, green bond, green mortgage, something like that. I've been talking about green bonds for a long time. But clearly, I think on the project side, on the developer side, the feed-in tariff is not enough. Because I understand why banks do what they do, and they're not going to change that. So we do need something else in place, it seems like, right?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem. It's a very interesting problem. That's our company. We went to European and Asian banks because the Canadian banks don't they don't understand solar yet. It's just simple as that, and they just have to learn what it's all about. So that's the short answer.
And so we have agreement. And so in the meantime, though, what's missing? So feed-in tariff 2.0 review process, I guess what we're saying loud and clear, and I hear you 100%, we do need something to get over the bridge financing until banks figure it out and are at the table full tilt, right?
Well, thank you very much, and everybody has been spending here a lot of time, so I hope something positive comes out of this, and not just sit down and something that I could have done at the webcast, right? Thank you.
There's a camera, so I think these comments are being recorded, and I think OSEA is going to be making some recommendations on feed-in tariff 2.0. So I'm going to highlight yours again, right? Because I think it is important. The feed-in tariff by itself is not enough for the community power developer, for the small solar developer who can't get access to big five banks because they're, Kerry Adler down at Sky Power, right?
Or for that matter, Tom, almost any type of developer. And my question was actually going to be a segue off to that, and John already agreed to the point I was going to make, so it's somewhat moot maybe, but is that the big banks don't understand solar here, is the bottom line. Because there are banks, German banks, European banks, who will do it 15 years type, not 2 to 3 years. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous for a project that should be paying back over 10 years. And the main thing I wanted to come up here was to say that it's a red herring to compare this to a business. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, business with Tom years ago, and we had big bank loans based on software sales, projections that us as entrepreneurs, saying, gee, what are we going to sell next year? Well, gee, we sold $3 million this year. I think we can sell $4 million next year. And we didn't actually know who those customers were. And we had a big line of credit from the bank for that because we were guessing with projections, and so far we hadn't been wrong. So keep risking, keep throwing the dice with us. And it was yes, and we were able to get it. Here you have a 20-year contract with the OPA. So once you have a couple months of production to show that it's in production, there's very little risk. Bringing in a TransAlta doesn't matter because if it's operational, you don't need TransAlta at that point. It's operational. You know what your revenue stream is going to be. There's very little risk for the bank. The bottom line is you don't understand it.
I would agree.
So,
I agree. And it's not because of just the lack of intelligence. I think it's just the way the bank, again, they're low risk. You're getting just like a mortgage on your house, right? The reason they're going to give you 3% is because if your primary source of repayment, your income, doesn't work, they're going to sell the house. So to get right now, the prime rate's 3%. So to get 4 or 5% money, it's a low risk venture. If it's a higher risk, you got to prove it. Well, then you're going to have to pay 8, 10%, whatever it is, and up, right? Or get an equity partner like Tom had mentioned in the previous example.
There's many ways of getting around this interruption. For instance, go 2 people to the left, buy an insurance policy for revenue interruption, and you make a few more bucks on that maybe. Plus, or have a holdback. I mean, when Laurie was up here, he was talking about projects that already had 40% equity in them.
This is a feed into. So I agree with you, Dennis, for sure. And there's obviously some frustration in the audience about the role of the Big Five. But the Big Five, they do what they do. And if there's something to be said out of these last few questions, it's that in feed-in tariff 2.0, we're saying to the government, there's not enough in place to allow the Big Five to play as their customers would like them to play, right? So there needs to be something else on the table. So we were wrong when we said the feed-in tariff was enough.
I thought I said it depends. That was my answer.
Right, sure, yeah, fair enough.
But I agree. Listen, I personally, selfishly want to help finance your project. And I think the banks, that's why I said in my initial comment, is that the OPA needs to share the information on the early successes.
That's all you need is the OPA?
And the revenue stream. Like just to show the revenue stream, right? Because you've said it's guaranteed. My initial customer said it's no issue. Here's the cost. We've got this engineering group. They're the best in the world. They're going to do our tracking system. 6 months later, he was a deadbeat. We fired him. We lost a couple $100,000, so they had to fund that. It's been delayed, so they have to have that outside cash flow to service the interest that the money they've already borrowed. So it's not just
construction risks. I totally understand. Okay. I've seen that.
Yeah. So,
but the situation that Laurie came up here was, what if we had bridge financing to the point where you had a couple checks? So it's operational, and its operation. Yeah. You can figure out how it's operating relative to nameplate capacity. The risk is, other than a D-rate factor, it should go at that rate for 20 years. Or if vandals take your inverter down for a month, well, hopefully you have insurance for that or something.
I agree with you because again, once it's up, connected, and you can demonstrate it, and whether it's 2 months, 3 months, I agree. There's got to be a debate or a discussion on what's an appropriate time frame. I agree with you 100%.
We're at 5:30, and I've been told this is it. So you've been standing there very politely. If it's a very fast question, let's do it.
Fast questions.
One fast question.
Okay, John. I thought I heard you say
that. Up the bank now, thanks.
This is great. Sorry, John.
No problem.
I thought I heard you say, if I understood you correctly, that bank wouldn't lend to a solar project that was leased. They have to own. Is that correct?
So on leased land.
You will not finance?
Here goes depends. I mean, it all depends.
Well, no, you either do or you don't.
It depends who owns the land. If it's a related party, but technically, if you lease somebody else's land,
yes,
we wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Why? Why not? By the way, why not was Enron's byline. I just thought I'd throw that.
It's more accessibility.
Okay, let me give you a simpler question. Let me give you a simpler question because I don't. We don't want to waste time. This is the last question, right?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, you have an energy portfolio, right? The bank says, well, let's diversify, right? Diversify is good.
Yeah.
What percentage of your energy portfolio is going to renewable energy?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, that was a lot coming our way on that last little bit, but I would like to thank my panel, and I would, yeah. It takes a lot of gumption in Big Five to step up. But over time, I think too, what we heard was they are learning, they are at the table, and they are playing. So let's let it evolve, right? I'd like to thank our panel very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Very much appreciated, and thank you for your questions and your attention. Cheers.